Commander Joe Blackwell's heart raced as he stood at the viewport of Space Station Horizon. The stars looked the same as always, but everything had changed. Today, humans would meet aliens for the first time. "They're here," said Communications Officer Peggy Wu. Her voice was steady, but her eyes were wide. The alien ship appeared suddenly. One moment there was empty space, the next a massive vessel unlike anything humans had built. It was shaped like a perfect teardrop, its surface gleaming with colors that shifted like oil on water. No visible engines, no external weapons, just smooth beauty that made Earth's best ships look like children's toys. "Open the welcoming channel," Joe ordered, straightening his uniform jacket. The main screen lit up, showing the face of the alien leader. The Veldari looked almost human, except for their silver skin and eyes with pupils shaped like diamonds. Ambassador Zithnar smiled, revealing teeth as white as fresh snow. "Greetings, promising younglings of Earth. We are pleased to finally introduce ourselves properly." Joe fought to keep his expression neutral despite the condescending tone. "On behalf of all humanity, we welcome you to Horizon Station. We look forward to peaceful relations between our peoples." 6 hours later, Joe sat in the station's conference room with Earth's top officials as Zithnar explained the Veldari's proposal for alliance. "Your species has done remarkably well, considering your limitations," the alien said, gesturing with long, six-fingered hands. "We've observed your development for nearly a century. Your determination is charming." The Earth representatives nodded politely, though Joe noticed several clenched jaws around the table. The Veldari spoke of humans the way adults spoke of clever toddlers. "We offer guidance in developing your technology, medicine, and science," Zithnar continued. "In exchange, we simply wish to establish cultural exchange and mining rights to several uninhabited bodies in your solar system that contain minerals valuable to us, but useless to your current technology." After the aliens left for their ship to allow humans time to discuss, the room erupted in debate. "They're treating us like pets," General Martinez said, slamming her fist on the table. "But think what we could learn," countered Dr. Harris, the lead scientist. "Their ships break the laws of physics as we understand them." Joe remained quiet, observing. He had fought in the Mars conflict and knew when he was outmatched. The Veldari could probably destroy Earth if they wanted. Instead, they offered partnership, even if it came with disrespect. While the debate continued, Lieutenant Susan Carter entered the room with a data tablet. She approached Joe quietly. "Commander, may I speak with you?" Joe stepped aside with her. Susan was one of Horizon's best astrophysicists. "What is it, Lieutenant?" Susan showed him readings from a star system about 8 light-years away. "I've been tracking unusual radiation patterns from KSR-42. Something's not right." Joe looked at the complex graphs and numbers. "Not my area." "What am I seeing?" "Signs that the star is unstable," Susan said. "I think it could go supernova much sooner than standard models predict." Joe frowned. "Have you mentioned this to the Veldari? This seems like something their advanced science could confirm." Susan shook her head. "No, sir, but I checked their published star charts. They classify KSR-42 as stable for another 1,000 years. Before Joe could respond, the room fell silent as the global president stood to speak. "We will accept the Veldari offer," she announced. "Humanity cannot pass up this opportunity to advance." Joe nodded to Susan. "Write up your findings. I'll make sure someone looks at them." Susan smiled weakly. "Yes, sir." As Joe returned to the main table, he glanced back at the viewport. The Veldari ship gleamed perfectly against the darkness, beautiful and advanced. He wondered what else these aliens might be wrong about, besides one seemingly ordinary star. 6 months had passed since the Veldari arrived. Their sleek embassy tower now stood in the heart of New York City, rising twice as tall as any human-made building. Chief Engineer Frank Miller walked through the halls of the alien ship Celestial Harmony, trying to ignore the looks of amusement from the Veldari technicians. Careful with that power coupling, young one, said Technician Vrelsar. Your human hands might find it quite hot. Frank nodded politely despite having worked with similar technology for 20 years. Thank you for your concern. This was his daily life now. Frank was one of 30 humans selected to learn from the Veldari. The aliens shared their knowledge, but always with small comments that made humans feel like children playing with toys. Remarkable how you manage space travel with such basic understanding of quantum mechanics. Vrelsar continued, watching Frank examine a power node, like watching a bird build a nest without understanding aerodynamics. Frank smiled tightly. We manage. He noticed something odd about the power system design. The Veldari technology was beautiful and efficient, but it had no backups, no redundancies. Every system was perfectly designed with no room for failure. Frank made mental notes to add to his growing private database. Meanwhile, on the Joint Research Station orbiting Mars, Lieutenant Susan Carter stared at her latest readings of star KSR-42. The unusual patterns had grown stronger. She was now certain the star would collapse much sooner than expected. Still watching your pet star? Asked Kel Thorne, her Veldari supervisor. The alien scientist glided across the lab with perfect grace. Yes, Susan said simply. She had learned that arguing with the Veldari only led to gentle mockery. Your persistence is admirable, if misplaced, Kel Thorne said. Our civilization has mapped stars for over 6,000 years. Our calculations are absolute. KSR-42 is stable. Susan nodded but said nothing. After Kel Thorne left, she sent a message to her human colleague, Paul Rodriguez. Meet me in Observation Room 3 during meal break. Paul arrived precisely on time. He was younger than Susan, with bright eyes that hadn't yet dulled from Veldari condescension. What's up? He asked, closing the door. Susan showed him her latest findings. The neutrino emissions have increased by 18%. The core is destabilizing faster than I predicted. Hall studied the data, frowning. The Veldari instruments aren't picking this up. They're not looking, Susan explained. Their technology is designed to measure what they expect to see. They're so certain about their star models that they don't regularly check for anomalies. What's your new timeline? Susan pulled up a simulation. 3 months, maybe less. And there are 3 Veldari science ships currently studying the gas giant in that system. Paul whistled softly. Have you told Commander Jenkins? Not yet. I wanted another human opinion first. You should tell him, Paul said firmly, even if the Veldari dismiss it. Later that day, Susan stood nervously in Commander Bill Jenkins' office. The commander was a practical man who had learned to balance human interests with Veldari expectations. I've reviewed your findings, Lieutenant, Jenkins said, closing her data file. I'm not an astrophysicist, but these patterns seem concerning. They are, sir. If I'm right, that star will go supernova within 3 months. Jenkins sighed heavily. The Veldari won't listen. They've made that clear already. So we do nothing? Susan asked. I didn't say that. Jenkins stood and looked out his window at the red Martian landscape. I'm sending your findings to Earth. What they do with them is above my pay grade. Susan felt relief wash over her. Thank you, sir. Don't thank me yet, Jenkins warned. The Veldari won't like us questioning their science. Just keep doing your work and keep me updated on any changes. As Susan left, Jenkins added, and Lieutenant, I hope you're wrong about that star. Susan paused at the door. So do I, sir, but I don't think I am. 1 year had passed since first contact. The grand hall of the Veldari embassy glowed with soft blue light as humans and aliens mingled at the anniversary celebration. Dr. Nancy Green, Earth's lead xenobiologist, watched the Veldari High Council members from across the room. They stood tall and elegant, their silver skin shimmering. Nancy took a deep breath and approached the group. Her hands trembled slightly as she clutched her datapad. Esteemed council members, she said with a small bow, may I speak with you about an important matter? High Counselor Zev Mara turned, her diamond eyes glinting. Of course, Dr. Green. We always enjoy your human insights. Nancy ignored the patronizing tone. I wish to discuss star KSR-42. Our scientists have detected concerning instability patterns. The 5 council members exchanged glances. One of them, Rilnoth, made a sound like tinkling bells. Nancy realized he was laughing. Ah, yes. The unstable star theory, Zev Mara said. We've heard of Lieutenant Carter's creative interpretations of basic stellar data. Her findings have been verified by multiple Earth scientists. Nancy said firmly. Our models predict collapse within 2 months now. High Counselor Brenvac, the oldest of the group, stepped forward. His voice was gentle, as if speaking to a child. Dr. Green, we appreciate your charming human intuition, but our civilization has studied stars since before your people invented the wheel. Our calculations are absolute. KSR-42 will remain stable for another 1,000 years. But, Nancy began, we have 3 research vessels in that system right now, Zev Mara added. Do you think we would risk our people if there was any danger? Nancy felt her face grow hot with embarrassment. The nearby humans and Velderi had stopped talking to watch the exchange. Thank you for your consideration, she said stiffly before walking away. On the Mars Research Station, Susan Carter and Paul Rodriguez worked through the night shift when most Velderi were resting. The observation room was dimly lit except for the glow of their screens. Look at these latest readings, Susan said, pointing to a graph with a sharp upward trend. The core instability is accelerating. We might have less than 6 weeks. Paul ran another simulation. The radiation burst from a supernova that size would extend at least 2 light years. Those Velderi ships are right in the danger zone. And they won't listen, Susan said, frustration clear in her voice. I've sent 16 reports up the chain. Each one gets dismissed. The door slid open. Commander Jenkins entered, looking tired. Lieutenant Carter, Mr. Rodriguez. Good news and bad news. They stood quickly. Sir, Earth has been taking your warning seriously, Jenkins said. The Military Council ran your data through their own models. They agree with your assessment. Susan felt a flood of relief. And the bad news. The Velderi ambassador has formally complained about human scientists spreading unfounded fears about KSR-42. They've requested all research on the star be turned over to their scientists. They can't do that, Paul protested. They can, and they have, Jenkins said grimly. But here's where it gets interesting. Admiral Peterson has authorized a special mission. He handed them each a data chip. You're both being transferred to the deep space vessel Pioneer. Officially, it's part of a cultural exchange program. Unofficially, Susan looked at her orders and smiled for the first time in months. We're going to observe KSR-42 directly. Jenkins nodded. The Pioneer leaves tomorrow. Pack your equipment and any data you can't leave behind. Captain Lisa Wilson has been briefed on the situation. What about the Velderi? Won't they suspect something? Paul asked. Admiral Peterson is handling that. He's telling them the Pioneer is conducting routine training exercises. Jenkins almost smiled. The ambassador said it was endearing the humans still needed such primitive drills. Susan gathered her data tablets. We'll be ready. As Jenkins left, Paul turned to Susan. Maybe now we can finally prove you were right. I don't want to be right, Susan said quietly. If I'm right, those Velderi ships are in terrible danger. The deep space vessel Pioneer moved quietly through the darkness. Captain Lisa Wilson stood on the bridge, watching her crew work. The ship was one of Earth's newest, built with some Velderi technology, but mostly human engineering. Status report, Lisa ordered. Her first officer, Alan Boyd, looked up from his screen. All systems running at optimal levels, Captain. We'll reach our observation position in 18 hours. Lisa nodded. And our special passengers? Dr. Carter and Dr. Rodriguez are setting up their equipment in Science Lab 3. In the lab, Susan and Paul worked quickly to install their specialized instruments. The equipment had been designed specifically to monitor and survive extreme radiation bursts. The Velderi had called such devices wasteful and unnecessary when human engineers first proposed them. "Will the shields hold if we're right?" Paul asked as he calibrated a sensor array. Susan checked her calculations again. The Pioneer's radiation shielding is 10 times stronger than standard Velderi designs. If we stay at our planned distance, we should be safe. The door opened and Frank Miller walked in. The engineer had been reassigned to the Pioneer just days ago. "Need any help?" he asked. Susan smiled. "Frank, I didn't know you were on board." "Last-minute transfer," he explained. "Admiral Peterson thought you might need someone who understands Velderi technology. I've spent the last year studying their ships." "What did you learn?" Paul asked. Frank's expression grew serious. "Their tech is amazing, but they have a critical weakness. They don't build in backups. Everything is designed to work perfectly the first time, every time." "What happens when something doesn't work perfectly?" Susan asked. "Catastrophic failure," Frank said. "They're so confident in their designs that they've forgotten the value of redundancy." Meanwhile, in the Velderi High Council chamber on Earth, Ambassador Zith-Nar faced Admiral John Peterson across a gleaming table. "We notice your vessel Pioneer has changed course," Zith-Nar said. "It appears to be heading toward the KSR-42 system." Admiral Peterson kept his face neutral. "Yes, we're conducting routine training exercises in that sector." "Training exercises?" The ambassador's diamond eyes narrowed slightly. "Near a star your scientists incorrectly believed to be unstable." "The location was chosen for its distance from regular traffic lanes," Peterson replied smoothly. "And yes, some routine sensor calibration will be performed. Your own ships in that system can observe our drills if they wish." Zith-Nar made the tinkling sound of Velderi laughter. "How endearing that your species still requires such primitive training. Our pilots are connected directly to their vessels through neural links. They need no practice." "Different approaches to the same goals," Peterson said diplomatically. Back on the Pioneer, Captain Wilson received a message from Earth Command. "The Velderi know we're heading to KSR-42, she told Susan during their evening briefing. "Admiral Peterson covered for us, but they're suspicious." "Have they recalled their research vessels?" Susan asked. "No, they're making a point of keeping them there to show how confident they are in their calculations." Susan looked at the latest readings from the star. The instability was growing faster than even her revised models had predicted. "How many Velderi are on those ships?" she asked quietly. "Nearly 300, Captain Wilson answered. "And they're much closer to the star than we'll be." Susan felt sick. "We need to warn them directly." "The High Council has forbidden their ships from acknowledging any human warnings about the star," Wilson said, "and we've been ordered not to provoke a diplomatic incident." "So we just watch if it happens?" Susan asked. Captain Wilson's face hardened with resolve. "My orders are to observe and report. But if that star blows, I will not sit by while lives are in danger, diplomatic incident or not." As the Pioneer continued toward its destination, Susan returned to the lab. The latest readings showed the star's core collapsing even faster. "They might have only days, not weeks. Hold together just a little longer," she whispered to the image of the star on her screen. "Just until we can convince them to move." The Pioneer reached its observation position, hanging in space at a carefully calculated safe distance from KSR-42. Through the main viewport, the star looked peaceful and ordinary, its yellow-orange glow steady against the black of space. Susan Carter hadn't slept in 20 hours. Her eyes burned as she studied the latest readings. Paul stood beside her, his face grim. "It's happening faster than we thought," he said quietly. Susan nodded. "The core temperature has increased by 30% in just 6 hours. At this rate," she didn't finish the sentence. They both knew what it meant. Captain Wilson entered the lab. "Report, Dr. Carter." "We have less than 48 hours," Susan said, looking up from her screens. "Maybe only 24. Wilson's expression remained calm, but her eyes showed concern. "Are you certain?" "As certain as I can be. The star's core is collapsing rapidly." Wilson tapped her communication badge. "Wilson to bridge. Open a channel to the Velderi research vessels." Susan and Paul exchanged surprised looks. "Captain," the communications officer responded, "the Velderi High Council has forbidden their ships from accepting direct communications from us regarding the star." "I'm aware of the diplomatic restrictions," Wilson said firmly. "But I will not have the deaths of 300 Velderi on my conscience. Send this message on all emergency frequencies. This is Captain Lisa Wilson of the Earth vessel Pioneer. Our instruments detect imminent stellar collapse of KSR-42. We strongly advise immediate evacuation from your current positions. This is not a drill." There was a pause before the officer responded. "Message sent, Captain. No acknowledgement received." Wilson turned to Susan. "Keep monitoring. I want to know the moment anything changes." 12 hours passed. The Pioneer's crew worked intense shifts, all eyes on the increasingly unstable star. Frank Miller joined Susan in the lab, bringing coffee. "Any response from the Velderi ships?" he asked. Susan shook her head. "They're ignoring us. All 3 vessels are continuing their research as if nothing's wrong." Frank looked at the star's image on the main screen. "Their arrogance is going to get them killed." "The High Council sent us a message," Susan said, pulling it up on a side screen. "They say our unnecessary alarm is disrupting important research, and that perhaps witnessing true stellar stability will finally educate humans on proper astrophysics." Frank snorted. "They still think we're children playing with things we don't understand." Suddenly, alarms blared throughout the lab. Susan jumped to her feet, checking readings that were now spiking across all monitors. "Captain to the science lab immediately." She called into her communicator. Wilson arrived within moments, followed by several senior officers. "What's happening?" Susan pointed to the main display where the star's core was showing massive energy fluctuations. "It's beginning. Core collapse has reached critical point." "How long?" Wilson asked. "Minutes, maybe less." Susan's voice was steadied despite her racing heart. Wilson didn't hesitate. "Bridge, this is the captain. Broadcast on all frequencies. Maximum power. Emergency evacuation order. KSR-42 supernova imminent. All vessels clear the sector immediately." "This is not a drill." "Repeat, supernova imminent." On the main screen, they could see the 3 Velderi ships, elegant teardrop-shaped vessels, still in their research positions near the star. "They're not moving," Paul said, his voice tight with tension. "Activate all shields," Wilson ordered. "Prepare for radiation wave." The Pioneer's human-designed shields hummed to life, layers of protection engaging one after another. The ship's lights dimmed slightly as power was diverted to defensive systems. Susan watched the star with a mix of scientific fascination and horror. The surface began to pulse visibly, energy patterns rippling across its face. "It's happening," she whispered. The bridge crew, the scientists, everyone on the Pioneer fell silent, watching as KSR-42's core finally collapsed. For one breathtaking moment, the star seemed to shrink, pulling inward. Then, with blinding speed, it exploded outward in a flash so bright that even the filtered view screens momentarily overloaded. The first radiation wave hit the Pioneer seconds later. The ship shuddered but held firm as its specialized shields absorbed the impact. On the sensors, 3 Velderi vessels suddenly went dark. Chaos erupted on the Pioneer's bridge as the supernova's first wave passed. Warning lights flashed, but the ship's systems remained functional. "Damage report," Captain Wilson called out. "Shields holding at 62%, reported the operations officer. "Minor power fluctuations in non-essential systems. No casualties." Susan stared at her screen in horror. The Veldari ships have lost all power. Their main systems are offline. Wilson didn't hesitate. Prepare rescue shuttles. Contact Earth Command and inform them of the situation. First Officer Boyd looked concerned. Captain, the radiation levels between us and those ships are extremely high. That's why we brought the radiation-hardened shuttles, Wilson said firmly. We anticipated this possibility. Frank Miller stepped forward. I should lead the rescue team. I know Veldari ship systems better than anyone else on board. Wilson nodded. Approved. Take 2 additional engineers and medical staff. Be ready to launch in 10 minutes. As Frank rushed to prepare, Susan continued monitoring the star. Another radiation wave will hit in approximately 40 minutes. The shuttles need to be back by then. In the shuttle bay, Frank and his team donned specialized radiation suits. The 3 shuttles were smaller than standard models, but built with extra shielding and backup systems, designs the Veldari had dismissed as inefficient. Remember, Frank told the rescue teams, Veldari ships have no manual overrides. Their systems are designed to work perfectly every time, with no contingency plans. We'll need to improvise. The shuttles launched, flying through the radiation-filled space toward the stricken alien vessels. From the outside, the beautiful Veldari ships showed no damage, but all lights were dark. Frank's shuttle reached the largest ship, the Celestial Wisdom. No response to communication attempts, he reported back to the Pioneer. Beginning emergency docking procedures. The human shuttle attached to the Veldari ship's airlock. Frank's team cut through the sealed door with laser tools. Inside, emergency lights cast a faint blue glow. The Veldari crew moved in confused panic. Their silver skin looked dull in the dim light, and their graceful movements had given way to frantic gestures. A Veldari officer approached Frank, her diamond eyes wide with fear. How are you here? All systems failed simultaneously. We came to help, Frank said simply. Our ship was shielded against the radiation burst. The officer looked confused. But our calculations were wrong, Frank finished. KSR-42 went supernova exactly as our scientists predicted. Now we need to evacuate your people before the next radiation wave hits. The Veldari crew stared at the humans in their bulky radiation suits. Frank could see the moment their understanding shifted. These primitive humans had come prepared for a disaster the Veldari had deemed impossible. Frank activated his communicator. Miller to Pioneer. We've made contact. Beginning evacuation of the Celestial Wisdom. Request status of other rescue teams. Teams 2 and 3 have successfully docked with the other vessels, Captain Wilson replied. You have 32 minutes before the next radiation wave. The evacuation moved quickly. The Veldari, despite their shock, followed human instructions without the usual condescension. Their survival instincts overrode their pride. On the second ship, Veldari scientists helped human rescuers locate crew members trapped in sealed sections. On the third, medical staff from both species worked together to treat those injured when systems failed. Back on the Pioneer, Susan watched the clock anxiously as the star continued its violent transformation. 20 minutes until the next wave, she announced. The first shuttle returned, crowded with Veldari survivors. Then the second. As the radiation levels began climbing again, the third shuttle, Frank's, was still docked to the largest Veldari vessel. Miller, status report, Wilson demanded. Frank's voice came through with static. Final group boarding now. We have 17 more survivors to evacuate. Radiation levels are spiking, Susan warned. The wave is coming earlier than predicted. Wilson leaned forward in her chair. Miller, get out of there now. Almost done, Captain, Frank replied, not leaving anyone behind. The bridge crew held their breath as the countdown timer reached 5 minutes. Finally, the last shuttle detached from the Veldari ship and raced toward the Pioneer. Shuttle 3 is clear, operations reported. 4 minutes to radiation wave. Get them in and seal all hatches, Wilson ordered. Prepare for impact. 3 weeks after the supernova, the Pioneer returned to Earth. The ship carried 89 Velderi survivors, all that could be saved from the 3 research vessels. As they approached Earth orbit, Captain Wilson stood on the bridge with Ambassador Zithnar beside her. "Your people did the impossible," Zithnar said quietly. His once perfect silver skin now bore faint scars from radiation exposure. "You not only predicted what our scientists deemed impossible, but you prepared for it and saved our people." Wilson nodded. "That's what humans do. We prepare for the worst while hoping for the best." In the main conference room of Earth's Space Command Center, a historic meeting took place. The Velderi High Council sat on one side of the table, their usual elegant posture replaced by a new humility. Across from them sat Admiral Peterson, Dr. Nancy Green, Susan Carter, Paul Rodriguez, Frank Miller, and Captain Wilson. Zithnar stood to address the gathered officials from both species. His voice carried none of the condescension that had once been so common. "Today, I speak not as a representative of a superior civilization, but as a humble student," he began. "For thousands of years, the Velderi have believed our understanding of the universe was complete. We thought our technology perfect. We saw humans as charming primitives with much to learn." He looked directly at Susan. "We were wrong. Dr. Carter saw what our scientists missed. Your warning, which we dismissed with arrogance, would have saved our research vessels if we had listened." High Counselor Zev Mara spoke next. "What troubles us most is not that we made a scientific error. It is that we had no systems in place for when that error occurred." Frank nodded. "Your technology is still more advanced than ours in many ways, but you designed everything to work perfectly the first time, while we designed everything to fail safely," Admiral Peterson added. "Humans have learned through many harsh lessons that perfect systems don't exist." Susan stood with her data tablet. The Pioneer survived because it had redundant shields, backup power systems, and radiation-hardened equipment. Your ships had none of these. More importantly, Captain Wilson said, "We had plans for emergency response. Your crew had no procedures for total system failure because you believed it could never happen." The room fell silent as the Velderi absorbed these words. Finally, Zithnar spoke again. "We request that Earth share its approach to what you call emergency preparedness. This concept has been lost to our civilization after millennia without major disasters." Admiral Peterson smiled. "We would be honored. And perhaps you can help us improve our technology using your advanced knowledge, tempered now with a bit of human caution." 6 months later, Susan Carter stood at the observation window of the newly established Carter-Rodriguez Observatory. The facility orbited Earth, dedicated to stellar research and early warning systems. Beside her stood Kel Thorne, her former Velderi supervisor. The combined Velderi-human scientific team has identified 3 more stars showing early signs of instability, Kel Thorne said, his tone respectful. "Using your detection methods, we can now predict stellar collapse decades in advance." Susan smiled. "And the new emergency response protocols?" "Being implemented across all Velderi vessels," Kel Thorne confirmed. "Our ship designers have begun incorporating what you call redundancy into all critical systems." In the shipyard below, a new class of vessel took shape. It combined Velderi efficiency with human safety measures, the first true collaboration between the species. Admiral Joe Blackwell, promoted after the KSR-42 incident, watched the construction with Zithnar at his side. They stood as equals now, neither looking down on the other. "We still have much to teach each other," Zithnar said. Blackwell nodded. "That's the beauty of true alliance. We're stronger together than either of us could be alone." As they watched the new ship's framework grow, the lessons of the supernova remained clear. No species had all the answers. Humility, caution, and cooperation would guide both civilizations as they ventured into the stars, prepared now for whatever the universe might throw at them.